Welcome anybody who's watching right now. This is LARKAST episode 6, and we have a very special guest. Introduce yourself, please.
Hi there, LARKAST fanatics, Larkheads as they're known around the LA world, really internationally.
Yeah.
My name is Joshua Ray Gooch. I'm a guitar player and
Perfect.
person who loves music kind of in general. So that's
From the East Coast.
No, West Coast.
Oh no, we have a lot of mutual friends from the East Coast.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
right.
No,
That's
I'm
right.
a West Coast.
That's right.
He lives in Alabama for a little bit.
That's what I'm
I lived in
thinking.
Alabama
That's
for
what I'm
about a
thinking of.
year.
Yeah.
But every other moment of my existence has been Seattle, then San Diego, then LA.
Gotcha.
So pretty much West Coast through and through, which is why I'm an absolute baby bitch when it comes to humidity. Because we were talking about that before the podcast, which people love when you reference conversations that weren't on camera.
Yeah. That's why it's called Inside Jokes with Lark.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't. Okay, cool.
No, it's not.
So I when it comes to humidity, I'm just a baby about it because West Coast there's like none.
Yeah.
Yeah. The humidity on the East Coast is no joke. It really makes a man out of you.
Yes.
You know
Which is why I think of myself as a young boy still.
That's funny.
Just a baby boy.
Just a baby boy.
Yeah. That's
a
a
baby
great
Josh.
way to kind of flirt at a bar. I'm just a baby boy. And they're like, please leave. Why are you here? This is creepy.
One of the cool things about Josh is he runs a weekly gig called Boba Jam, which I think at least people who watch at this stage in our career, they're probably going to know what that is by now because we've mentioned it several
Yeah, we
times.
mentioned it in 2, 3, 4.
Oh, dude, we got
3.
Boba Jam got a mention?
It did.
Hell
A
yeah.
couple, yeah. Do you have a hashtag Boba Jam? Should I
No,
start
but I
hashtagging that?
really should. I was gonna start like a page for Boba Jam, but their Instagram is just so inundated with like everybody's like sub things have their own pages, and I'm just like people don't.
Yeah.
I
Too
didn't
much
want to
to
contribute
keep
to
track
that, but I
Yeah.
should start like a hashtag thing where at least people could like search it.
Totally.
Which I don't know why I haven't. That's actually a very
Cool.
simple
I'm gonna need, like,
and good
10%
idea.
if that's cool.
Yeah, because I'm making a ton of I'm making so much money
Off
on
of the
Boba Jam.
mentions from online.
Well, and just Boba Jam in general is just raking
Very
in
obvious
cash.
idea.
Right. Yeah, so we've mentioned Boba Jam a billion times, and Josh is actually the guy who runs that. It's like your deal, right?
Yeah. My friend
Which is so cool.
Arlene. It's a T-Pop, which is the location, which is in the North Hollywood Arts District. It's kind of typically the people know where Republic of Pi is because it's kind of like an arts district,
It's like a
spot where everybody
Right.
goes. It's kind of around the corner and a little bit more of an isolated area, just a couple hundred yards away from there. And I've been going to T-Pop since I found it, like a couple months after it opened up. The place I usually go for boba because I'm a boba. Talking about there's Lark heads. I'm a boba head.
Yeah, man.
Um,
My guy.
I'm a boba fanatic, and the place I usually go to was closed on like a Sunday, and I just looked it up on Yelp, and there
Best
was this
boba
new
in
spot.
LA.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty much.
Yeah,
and I was like,
yeah.
oh yeah, and that was like 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, and I've just been going there forever. And I'm friends with Arlene, who runs the whole place. And like 4 months ago, I was there with some friends, and I kind of asked her, like, she knows I play music, but I've never played. She's never been to a show or anything like that. So I was like, why don't you have music here? You have such a big patio.
And they have it looks like a stage. You know what I mean?
It totally-
It's like designed for that.
It
Yeah.
totally does.
Yeah, I
And that
know.
whole back area, I should have checked my facts before coming here, but I'm pretty sure that was an auto repair shop, which is why they have so much room on that patio. It's huge.
That makes sense.
Like I can't think of another coffee boba place in LA that has that big. It's massive.
Yeah.
So I asked her why she didn't have music there. She said, "Well, we're kind of in a neighborhood. So usually people want to do music at night, and we don't want to
Sure.
irritate the people that live behind us."
Yeah.
And then it was also, she was like, it's just not financially maybe the best move for us. And I was like, what about this?
Yeah.
What if you don't pay us jack shit and we do it during the morning?
She was like, I'm listening.
And she's like, no, she was just like, I'm in. She literally was like, I'm in. Cool.
Great.
And then like the next Thursday it started. Like I
That's
was like,
killer.
I basically told her, I said, look, you won't have to do anything. I'll make the flyers. I'll do all the booking. I will set the show up. I'll tear it down.
Perfect.
It's just functioning on your, the
Property,
property
yeah.
of T-Pop, and people will come and buy drinks, but like your employees won't have to do anything. And so it was kind of like, why would anyone say no to that?
Right,
There's really
yeah.
no, and I don't think they realized at the time, like the type of players that were going to be there. You know, within like 2 weeks, I think the second week, like Larry Goldings came out and played for like
Crazy.
an hour and 15 minutes, just brought a melodica in his backpack. I didn't even know he was going to
Crazy, man.
show up.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it's like, I don't think they knew that like that like caliber of musician was going to be out playing on their like patio.
And also, if they walked out, they probably wouldn't be like Larry Goldings.
Yeah, no, they
They
no,
probably wouldn't be like that. They'd be like, chai tea, that's you, right?
that's yeah. I'm like,
with the
that's-
little piano.
You,
know.
how dare you speak to him that way?
Right? Yeah, right.
That is Dr. Larry Goldings.
Right.
I don't think
that's
he is.
Dr. Chai. Chai
Yeah, it's
tea.
Dr. Chai tea to you.
Yeah.
But it's been so fun. I think we've done 3.5 months of Boba Jam,
And only
it's
missed a few, right?
I
Only missed a
think
few.
we missed 1 week because I
Nice.
was in Seattle for some family stuff. But other than that, every week has happened. We got rained
awesome.
out 1 week
That's right.
during
And
the
it-
heart
yeah.
of summer when it
yeah.
was 100 degrees out and we got rained out.
So
Yeah.
weird.
It was the weirdest weather, and it was like it was just a bad day for it to happen. It was like a bass player, this guy Kimon Kirk, that's like really great, and I'd never played with him before. I was really looking forward to it.
That's
You
a
know, it's
bummer.
Boba Jam's not super early, but it's an early gig for
Sure.
a musician.
Sure.
Right.
So like the
So it's
fact
10,
that they
10 o'clock, right? 10, 12?
starts at 10, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you should get there at like 9:30 when you're loading it. So it was pretty early, and I felt like shit about. I mean, there's nothing I could have done. It wasn't the rain wasn't even on the forecast. It was just random. But yeah, we got rained out 1 week, and I missed 1 week. But other than that, it's been consistent for about 3.5 months now.
Yeah.
And I love what I love about it is the crowd. Like every crowd, like I think the first or second time I went, you were like, "Hey, this is so and so. Tell us a little bit about your instrument."
Yeah,
And I laughed because I genuinely thought it was a joke.
sure.
Because normally on a stage, you would never do that.
No,
You know what I
no.
mean? Like no bar wants to hear about somebody's gear. But everybody there was like, "Yes, please tell us about it." And then he did, and I was like hooked the whole time.
Yeah.
and loved it. And so that it's just cool. Like that's the vibe.
We do a
of the
segment
gig.
called Instrument Facts.
Right. Yeah, so
and
catchy.
it really is
Sexy
yeah,
title.
it's so sexy. Really,
With
that's
X,
the
F-A-X.
Right.
It's facts.
Yeah,
That's already another
Instrument
word.
facts.
It's already another word.
Yeah,
we
I thought I was
bring a
being
fax
clever.
machine on stage.
Yeah. We try to force our instruments through the machine.
Yeah, it never works because it's just they haven't made a fax machine that big, and I don't think they're making fax machines anymore at all.
No.
If you do, I get 10%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
all
kind of
fax
this is
machines.
this entire podcast is legally binding.
Yeah.
Everything you say,
Yes.
they own 10%. Even if you don't say it and you're just listening,
Yeah.
they own
We
your
take
ideas.
10%. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know what, I haven't done it the last few weeks. I probably should. It's a fun thing
cool.
because everybody in the audience, for the most part, are either players themselves,
Yeah.
people that just love going to a lot of live music, or they're like friends or siblings or something of people playing on stage, or
Yeah.
their friends ask them to come. So, I mean, most of the time, almost everybody on the patio is there specifically for Boba Jam. There's a couple people who just show up to T-Pop and are like, hey, there's music going on.
Sure, yeah.
But I'd say like 75-80% of the people back there usually are like there for the music.
Definitely.
So it gives you it's also like people aren't getting drunk. It's like it's not a bar environment where you can be like, tell us about your 56 P bass,
Right.
Timothy, and then
Yeah.
like people just are like, boo. Like at Boba Jam, they're like
Leonard Skinner.
yeah, they just name bands they like.
Yeah.
At Boba Jam, it's kind of an open space. It's a
Yeah.
safe space. I think
That's always how I've described it.
that's yeah.
Hey, you should come to this gig. Yeah, they play music, bunch of cool people, and it's a very safe space.
It's a really safe space. So if you feel like you will be offended by certain notes,
yeah. They probably won't play them, so it's okay.
yeah, we only play them like major scale.
Yeah.
That's all I allow. There's no flat fives. It's
Right.
like medieval England.
Right.
There are no flat fives,
Yeah.
no tritones.
And that's
the
because of your
devil's
religious
note.
beliefs, right?
Yeah, Scientology.
Right.
Right. I'm sure that. No, I'm not a Scientologist. That's actually a joke I need to clear up. I don't want to end up on Leah Remini's show. It's a great show, by the way. Watch that.
You'll get like DMs. People would be like, "One of us."
Yeah. I'll probably get a phone call from Tommy C from Tommy Cruise.
Yeah. Although he's not in, right? He's
I think
out.
he just left.
What?
Right?
I think, or not. When I say just, I mean within the past
Crazy.
2 years. I think.
Yeah,
No.
He did.
Nobody
look it up.
Nobody
look it up right now.
Is that
No one tell us either.
I swear
That's what I heard.
to Xenu that he is still in.
Don't you take Xenu's name?
I'm sorry. I will do research after this. I legitimately am very curious about Tommy C.
Yeah.
He is clearly insane, but man, is he a good actor.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's that thing of like that sort of like I don't want to be disparaging, like the sort of like delusional self-belief that comes with certain types of folks. Like it benefits his acting. I'm sure it does not benefit his ability to
communicate
as a person. But man, he's such a good actor.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, I feel like probably most really great actors, like most musicians, are somewhat.
There's something really weird.
There's something wrong with them.
Yeah, right.
Which is something I feel like we've all like learned, but also like learned how to deal with people that have sort of strange ways of viewing the world, because we're around a lot of people like that all the time that have really sort of interesting ways of interacting. And
I think as a musician, I've never put this into words, but when you meet another musician, it doesn't matter how cool they are. You'll be like, man, what a down-to-earth guy. In the back of your mind, you're like, but there's something.
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just going to wait and find it. But I guess the vantage point of, like, if any kind of normie is talking to a musician and they find, like, the one weird thing, you know, if they're, like,
Normie.
if they're just, like, talking to them and they eventually are like, yeah, so I'm drinking tiger's blood and blah, blah, blah. And they just keep going. A regular person, a normie, would be like, whoa. But as a musician, you just have learned to be like, mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
Right.
people genuinely are scarred emotionally.
Yes.
No, I mean, on a real note, though, like
Real.
there are a lot of. I mean, you have to be somewhat, if not completely obsessive, if you're going to be a professional musician. Maybe not if you're in a band or if you're in a rock, but there's not a whole lot of that. I mean, most of the people that we probably know do some sort of like hired work on top of playing in bands.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and to be like a hired musician where you're essentially like brought in as a hired gun, like you have to be obsessive, in which case you probably have, I don't want to say you're deranged, but you have quirks about you that in a normal sort of world would be like, the hell's wrong with this guy?
Yeah.
But in the sort of musician world, they're like, yeah, that's just, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of encompassing. You know,
Yeah.
it's inclusive in like a really bizarre way.
Yeah.
It's funny. Garrett and I are constantly arguing about video games, and just because we like different kinds of video games, not whatever. But we were talking about something, and I was going on and on about this one aspect of some game, and Garrett was like, "Why do I have to know all that about a video game? I do that with drums already." And I was like, "Man, that's really valid. Like, I do that with bass too, so it's like I understand. You know what I mean?"
Yeah, but I also feel like a lot of musicians have other hobbies that they get equally obsessed about that aren't the profession that because the obsessive personality thing rarely is completely just stuck in one area of your life. It's not like you're like, oh, I'm obsessive about music and everything else I don't give a shit about.
Yeah, right.
Like that. I don't think that's
I don't
probably.
think so
Yeah, because
either.
once you fall into something, I think like a lot of times I fall into something and I'm like, oh, maybe I could get into this, and maybe I don't pick it up as quick as I thought I could, and it's like, well, that's not worth like me totally diving headfirst into and like knowing the history and knowing.
But the
Sure.
fact that you have the foresight to know that that is the road you will go down, is
that's
100%
the thing. That's
true.
the whole
And
thing.
I know
Yeah.
that about myself too. And
Yes,
in
yeah,
fact,
yeah.
that was, I mean, years ago, people were asking me if I was going to play pedal steel back in 2012. I didn't know much about pedal steel. It was kind of peripherally a part of my existence, but I wasn't a super big country fan back then. Not that I actively didn't like it. It just wasn't a
Sure, yeah.
huge part of what I listened to or thought about as like influences. But man, being around Justin out there, he's just one of the best pedal steel players I've ever heard. Not only at playing like traditional, Buddy Emmons type stuff and Hawaiian stuff, but also taking it to a new place using delays and effects and, incorporating all the sort of like uncharted territory. To be honest, there's a ton of uncharted territory with pedal steel because it really hasn't been used outside of country music other than in the past like 20 years maybe.
Yeah, it's such like a demanding instrument. You know, I mean, most instruments are demanding. That's a stupid thing to say, but I just think like the amount of options you have.
I would say
pedal
of
steel is a lot.
The instruments that we regularly see in the West.
Yeah,
it's the hardest instrument.
It's certainly up there.
It's fretless. There are knee levers. There are foot levers. There are 10 strings. There's just it. As far as I'm aware, it's the most sort of intensive instrument that we have in our sort of like American.
And extremely mechanical, like like in every way. As for the player and the instrument, I remember one of those Levi gigs that we played. There was a steel player on that gig, and I looked under it, or like just to like see, and it was
like a car.
Yeah, I was like, nah, never mind, never mind.
Yeah, it's totally crazy, but I really fell in love with the instrument and was really lucky to have a couple of the Nashville guys from Shania's band that are just steeped in country music and pedal steel and I mean, but really country and bluegrass, that whole world of music that I just like wasn't familiar enough with. And you know, now I'm absolutely obsessed with country music and pedal steel. I mean, for the last probably like 6-7 years, but it took them sort of giving me that in. But man, I didn't really even realize how difficult pedal steel was until I saw Justin playing. I was like, what the F is he doing?
Yeah.
And then he explained it. And I was like, whoa. Yeah.
It's wild.
Yeah. It's super wild. It's funny also that instrument has never found its way into like more complicated styles of music.
I think probably because it's so difficult to play. I mean,
yeah, it just seems like the kind of people that are willing to like learn a bunch of jazz songs that nobody cares about would also be down to learn a really hard instrument. You know
that's true. It's kind of the same mentality.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Do you have enough time in your life to do both?
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Although there are those stories about when it was either Jerry Coker or Jocko played some cruise gigs, and they met people who played jazz on pedal steel, and they knew a bunch of like bird heads and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Buddy Emmons played quite a bit of that stuff as well.
Okay.
Like, and he's kind of like the cat,
Gotcha.
like for the like he's like the Charlie Christian of pedal
That's
steel.
cool.
I mean, I don't know if he I'm sure improvisationally he wasn't on the level of like Bird or Coltrane or something, but
still
to be able to play even through, you know, a bebop tune on pedal steel is just the intonation alone.
That would be such a pain.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah, like I can't even imagine. But I love the sound of it. But to be honest, like I don't think it sounds best on jazz. Although it can be cool to be like, wow, this guy's doing it.
Yeah.
It's just like guitar. Like I was reading this interview, I think it was last night, this John Scofield interview where he was talking about something that Pat Metheny had said to him, and he said, you know, guitar is best for big open chords and blues. That's what guitar is best for. And I completely agree.
Yeah, I get it.
Wow.
Not that guitar can't be used for other stuff, and I've really learned to love jazz guitar more, but for a long time, without having the bending and vibrato on most players, like especially the traditional guys, obviously SCO is different, and certain, you know, modern-ish players have a lot more, sort of players after Hendrix and Clapton have more of that in there, but I've learned to really appreciate it. But I used to always be like, man, like, guitar is not the best instrument to solo, especially, or even comp in jazz. It's like piano has such a more linear layout and is so much better for being able to access different voicings and stuff. Guitar's just not really made for that. Now, obviously, players like Jim Hall and cats like that have made it work, but
they're probably doing. And I this might be controversial to somebody, but they're kind of doing in some ways like kind of twice the work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I remember trying to explain to somebody why I had to in college why I had to think about my fingerings beforehand when you sight read something. And I was like it's because I didn't put it into words very well at the time, but later somebody else said it. They were like, "Well, yeah, you have the same note in 3 different places." And because of that reason, you know, you have to like do more forethought. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and obviously same with guitar.
Right, yeah.
And then there's also the difference of tuning of having the B string in there too.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it just that's why I think soloing over changes, you see a really clear distinction between the difficulty on guitar versus like saxophone.
Yeah, where you're
instrument
just- it's
that's
just melody.
monophonic. It's
Yeah.
all melody, and like saxophone players, like you can tell when they're playing over chord changes, they just like see every note in the chord like this. And
Right.
guitar as bass just doesn't function that way.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to get your head in that space.
Yeah,
for sure.
Which is why I think so many people come back to like what makes guitar and bass too. But I'd say with guitar even more with the bending and the blues stuff.
Yeah.
That it's so specific to guitar. I mean, there's not a whole lot of instruments like piano. It's a lot harder to have a voice on piano where you can play two notes and somebody goes like, "That's this guy." You know, there's certain guys like Brad Mehldau where you're like, he has such a specific touch.
Right.
But for guitar, that's kind of like even in the pantheon of the amazing guys. Like I hear two notes from B.B. King, I'm like, "That's B.B. King."
Yeah.
Two notes of Jeff Beck, that's Jeff Beck. Clapton, same. Like it's like the vibrato and the bending thing is a real stamp of your own sort of like internal dialogue or internal sort of way of hearing music.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it took me a really long time. First of all, I think what you're saying right now, like guitar is best suited for these things. I think that's a really mature thing. And I think as a younger musician, I mean, I think I fought that ideology.
I think ideology or ideologies.
Whatever.
I think you're good either way.
Yeah, I fought that philosophy for I mean like probably into my early 20s, like 20 maybe 20 or 21 did I finally realize like, okay, the bass is just good at certain things. Like, I just can't fight that anymore. Like when I transcribe this solo, this trumpet solo, it's not gonna sound as good on my instrument. That used to like I used to be like, no, I just need to
push
It's like,
through
it's
it.
like I'm not doing something right. Or
right.
Yeah,
But
totally.
it's true. I mean, and I think when you personally when I came to that realization and I started instead of being like, oh nuts, instead of being like that and being like, okay, well, what if I just did more of the things that bass is good at?
Totally.
You know, it really changed the way I was thinking. as a
Absolutely. And I
player.
feel like the other instrumentalists feel like bass has things that it can do that their instrument can't.
Which is
like
hilarious.
you're never gonna out. Yeah, right. You're never
the
gonna.
grass is always greener, you know.
Yeah,
You
right.
mean someone's thinking about me?
Yeah.
Someone's thinking about me. Like, really?
Yeah.
Like you can't play a legato phrase on bass the same way you can on a saxophone.
Right.
There's just no. It's not to say you can't make a legato phrase sound good or blah, but there's something about
same.
like a saxophone that like you're not gonna get that on bass. Some guys have really tried to get it on guitar. I mean, probably Alan Holdsworth stands out as probably like the guy who's gotten the closest.
Sure.
To get that like what I get the sheets of sound
Yeah, that, like
Coltrane thing.
smoothness, liquidy, you know, whatever.
Yeah, but it's just not. He did a lot of work to get that, and not many people
Yeah.
have been able to do that.
And I think that's the deal is that it's not that your instrument can't do that. It's just that you actually have to work that much harder to make it
Right.
happen, and even then it might not even hit the same heights. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah, that's why I want to hear a guy like Pat Metheny on guitar, where I don't play like Pat Metheny at all. I love his playing, but I don't, because he doesn't have a lot of the sort of like. There's clearly a blues influence, but it seems like it's he doesn't do a lot of bending and blah 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 like
Sure.
most jazz guitar players. But I still watch what he does. I'm just like, this is insane that his knowledge of the neck and of chord changes can keep up with
Yeah.
a piano player or a sax player that just has such a deep understanding of jazz music that
Yeah.
on guitar is just rarely achieved.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Totally. Yeah, I've always been like envious of drummers for this one reason. Like it's like if I only had to think about rhythms, which is not a true statement, right? Like drummers have to think about melody, they have to think about like
Sure, yeah.
tone color and things like that. But if I only had to think about rhythm, like that's or at least that's where I'm at right now. Is like most of what I'm thinking about every day in music land is like rhythm oriented. Like,
Sure.
Especially with soloing because I'm like trying to restructure myself as a player and in that way. But I always just think like, you know, what would I actually sound like if all I had to think about was rhythm? You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
it's like a pretty interesting kind of like thought study. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I wonder how dudes like Brad Mehldau and Metheny, like, you know, what were their kind of like what phases did they go through as a player? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, well, I know
it's pretty
Matheny,
interesting.
and he stated this a bunch in like I have this like interview book of his. It's a really good read actually. It's really good sort of knowledge for younger players and just people interested in music in general. But he has this whole thing where he talked about like when he was a young teenager, like he was basically a Wes Montgomery clone. He's like I could
see
literally do the Wes Montgomery thing and like nail it, but it wasn't.
Tony Williams like that too? Tony, yeah.
Sounded like who?
Just like, couldn't he kind of like really historically? Couldn't he like imitate like a bunch of really famous drummers?
I don't know.
I think I heard
think
that
it
once.
sounds familiar,
Probably.
though.
He
Sounds
was
like a
also
Tony
like a
thing that's
total
something-
freak though. Like I mean, his first record with Miles, he was like what 17 or something
yeah,
like
He
that.
was like crazy young.
Yeah, he was super
Yeah,
young.
like, and every jazz drummer I know is like, because I personally he's not. I like more like pocket style jazz drummers. But I do like Tony Williams, and talking to especially drummer friends, they're like Tony changed the game.
He really did.
Like on a Hendrix level on guitar, like he just changed everything. And for that, I feel like that's a huge deal. But I also know personally, like I love listening to like Philly Joe Jones and like Art Blakey,
Sure.
just pocket,
just killing.
just disgusting, nasty swing.
Yeah.
I like that more. But I also like completely understand the Tony Williams thing where it's like
he allowed us to do more.
Yeah,
totally.
and he's like an influence on obviously jazz drummers,
Sure.
but
But his approach to music is, I think, especially, it was a big influence on me. I mean, to be honest.
Sure,
When
yeah.
when I first heard him, because that quintet in particular, Tony Williams started off as my least favorite member of that band, and then rose just like to the very top.
Sure.
Because the first recordings I heard of that, I was like, whoa, this is out there. Like, this is what I was looking for at the time. It's like these guys are taking songs that we all play every day, and they're doing all these interesting things over them, and they're, throwing caution to the wind and all that, whatever. And I was like, but damn it, if that drummer is not the loudest thing I have ever heard, but I kept listening to it, and it just slowly, like, eventually I got to a point where I was just like, I get it. I get
Yeah.
why he plays that loud. I get why, I get like what he's trying to accomplish. Like, I
it
understand
takes it really does take time. I think that
Took me a while.
Same here though. I mean, I remember it being in high school and starting to get into jazz music because I still wouldn't be like I'm a jazz player at all.
Sure.
But I was like, all these players that I was interested in, whether it was like, Derek Trucks or, whomever, they would always mention jazz players.
Sure.
And I was like, well, there's something here. I need to figure out what it is. And some of it I listened to, I was just like, what the hell is going on? And honestly, a lot of that second great quintet stuff was like that for me, where I just put it on. I was just like, what?
You're just like, what are they doing?
I mean, I clearly knew it was like high level stuff, but I was just like, I don't like this.
Yeah.
But, I'd listen to like 50s Miles and was like, dude, this is it.
Yeah.
And I honestly, even to this day, like if somebody was like, you're Desert Island, you're going to take Miles' second great quintet, like all this amazing sort of outstretching stuff with Herbie and Tony, all those guys. I still love like Walkin'. And
I was just
like
about to
that's
say, relaxing. That's like probably still my favorite Miles CD to this day.
I just
really good.
love it. And I know to like hardcore jazz heads, they're probably like, yeah, but this other stuff broke new ground. I get it.
Yeah.
But there's something about that like 50s jazz in particular and maybe early 60s that it just gives me a little bit more of like I'm in a club, there's smoke everywhere. Like it gives me a little bit more of a space, whereas the sort of like experimental 60s stuff is a little bit more like this is for musicians and like really heavy, rather than like people that are just in there like smoking cigarettes and
chilling.
listening and drinking. It seems like now it's veering towards like this is for musos and stuff like that, which is fine.
Musos.
But
I like
like, I there's something about that era of like Chet Baker, Bill Evans, the like walking, relaxing era, Miles, like all of that stuff just gets my blood flowing.
Yeah, those CDs are great, and the story of those CDs I think is cool to me because, it was just like they had a certain amount of time, and they just cranked out takes. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was just like they were just like, all right, Mr. Davis, you have this much time, and this record company needs this many CDs, and they just started calling tunes.
It really
and
is
they just
amazing.
Went and went and went. I wonder how it broke down. Like, I would have loved to see chronologically which songs they recorded. You know what I mean?
On what days and like.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure
like,
I'm
that
sure
would
at
be-
least
that would
what
be
kind of
interesting.
blew, because that record has become so famous and so iconic. There's got to be some sort of like book
Surely.
about that recording session where you could hear about. I know I've read some stuff. I know Miles talks about it a little bit in his autobiography, which is an amazing read.
Yeah.
I reread it last year and had on the records of the book while I was reading it. So
that's
like
cool.
I literally kept my like Bose speaker next to me, and like when I was on the Birth of Cool era of stuff, like I had Birth of Cool on as I was reading.
That's cool.
It was a nice way of reading it. I felt like it really gave it sort of structure.
That's cool.
You know.
That's very cool. You know what's funny? One of the things that I learned from listening to Tony Williams, which I think is not one of the common things that I feel like people talk about, is that I learned that it's really cool to groove from Tony Williams, because I remember listening to like it was like Joshua or Milestones, one of those fast songs.
Yeah.
And so he's like, and they're like burning, and he's going crazy, like nee, 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 nee. And then I realized that whenever he started to like lose the groove, or like it was just time got weird, he would do a fill there, and the fill would get him back into
Like
doing
into the space.
groove.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he was like, he
Yeah.
was solving problems. He wasn't. It wasn't.
Totally.
The point was not the fill. That was like a problem solver.
Sure, like
And
gets him back on track.
Yeah, and I was like, that means he's really into grooving. That's cool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it was
yeah.
like, I kind of learned like a really funny thing from him.
Yeah.
From listening to him in particular.
Yeah, there's certain guys where you see things like that. You're like, I like to get into like players enough where you start to learn about their inner dialogue
Totally.
from listening to them, where you can
Totally.
hear where you're like, oh, they had a change of direction that was a very clear.
Yeah.
It might not have been conscious, but it was a very clear change of direction mid solo or something.
Yeah.
I love getting to know a player well enough, like across recordings, where you can start to hear.
Yeah.
And obviously we keep going back to Miles, but that's because like every player comes back to him for the most part, where you hear him, where he's playing and you could tell he's setting up things for everybody else while he's playing his solo.
Totally. He's music dad all the time.
He's straight up music
sure.
dad.
Yeah,
Like he is the equivalent of like a nice pair of New Balance dad shoes, but like as a jazz musician.
Like the coolest.
That sounds
New
like an
Balance shoes
insult.
you've
No,
ever
he's
seen in your
he's
life.
yes, like
Yeah, yeah.
he is music daddy.
He
for sure.
totally is. He
Yeah.
totally is.
And it really is astounding when you look at the landscape of like, when you look at a jazz festival of the last like 15, 20, I mean, it goes back even further, but I'm just to make the point that like he died in what, 90?
Yeah.
Or in early 91,
it's
something
like
like
91,
that. I think it was
yeah.
early 91, yeah. And then, yeah, because then Stevie Ray Vaughan died like not long after that, I believe. Yeah.
Whoa,
But
crazy.
it's amazing. You could still look at in 2019, like the headliners of a big jazz festival, 70% of them played in Miles' band.
That's so cool.
You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's
Like
wild.
whether it's like, Robin Ford or Bill Evans, the sax player,
Right.
Bill Evans, or
Chick.
Schofield or Chick
Yeah.
Corea or Herbie or like
Yep.
everybody, for like not everybody.
But a lot of 'em,
But
though.
almost all of them have played with Miles, and it's unbelievable. Mike Stern.
Yeah, it's almost like we talked about this before. It's almost like Colonel Bruce, right?
Yes.
Like, there's like
Yeah.
a whole generation of musicians from this one area
Yeah.
that if you were a dude that was killing at that time, you play it like you went through
Yeah.
Aquarium Rescue Unit or Colonel Bruce or
Yeah.
some form of that.
I mean, that was like the big jazz thing. It's like if you were this icon, you had like the younger guys in your band. You groom them until they go off and do their
Mhm.
own thing, and
Yeah,
then
yeah,
you do it again with another band, and
which is cool.
yeah,
People like that are really important, and I think Colonel Bruce for like Atlanta area is a huge deal.
Totally.
Now, a lot of people in LA don't even know who the hell he is.
Really?
No,
wow,
they don't. I bring up Aquarium Rescue, and people are like, they don't have
I
any
really
idea.
thought Colonel Bruce was
Weird.
like a more known, just because he's such a specific.
I think people
person,
might
you know?
people might know his name because of like O'Teal or Jimmy Herring or something.
Sure.
Um,
Wow.
but I don't think a lot of people out here really, and if they do know him, it's really like surface level. Like, oh, isn't that the guy that or I maybe have heard them, but
Yeah.
if you talk to people, you guys know, being from Tennessee, like
Yeah.
people around there know him if they're a musician, a professional musician,
Yeah.
and they know who was in his band and all
It's
that
funny
stuff.
that somebody would know Jimmy Herring and not know Colonel Bruce. That's like knowing Herbie but not knowing Miles. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
That's really
people
funny.
also know Jimmy now through the like jam world of Widespread Panic.
Yeah.
I guess
And
I think
Lights
that's
True,
changed
That
his
makes
like
sense.
awareness. But if you would have asked like 12 years ago or something before Jimmy was in Widespread Panic,
Right.
I think the only way people would know him was through
Colonel
ARU.
Bruce and Great
Yeah.
Day.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's really funny.
But yeah, they were a big band for me in high school. That was really the first
They're
music.
the perfect high school like band. Not because they're like low brow or anything.
Yeah.
But it's just like the such like a big like.
They got
fuck
all
the
the
man.
flash.
Yeah.
And the,
Yeah, you know, and they're
it's the-
weird and.
Well,
know,
it
it's cool,
had.
man.
I think a big part of it was like, it
like
didn't.
punk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was punk.
Honestly,
Because I
yeah.
started with punk rock. Like when I started playing guitar, I was listening to like the Misfits and Minor Threat and the Ramones and the Clash. Like that was my
Yeah.
shit. So I still like people with that mentality. Like even with like going back to jazz stuff. Like I love Monk because he's just like everything he does is a middle finger. Like even when it's beautiful, it's still the middle finger thing. And I think ARU had that, but it also had the like, we're not taking ourselves too seriously. We know this music is not cool.
Cool and like the like,
In the sort of like zeitgeist of like what people think of as cool. Like
Right.
people playing like really fast bluegrass fusion and having a song about frogs
Right.
is not this is, and keep in mind like they were before nerds were cool. And, you know, nowadays it's like now with all the tech stuff, it's like sort of like the like nerds have taken over concept, which I think to a certain extent is quite true. But when they were doing it, that was not like hip
No.
to be doing songs like Space is the Place and
Yeah.
songs about tree frogs and like
Yeah.
it was just like it was so odd. But you know, I came from that Allman Brothers obsessive world, and that's how I got to know Jimmy Herring. And then if you do your research, you immediately are like, well, what's this band he played in?
Right.
Oh, Teal was in it? He's in the
Yeah.
Allman Brothers. So that's how I found it, and it was like I was listening to that. That was probably the first like fusion stuff that I genuinely liked, because some of the other fusion stuff I thought I was supposed to like, and I don't want to call anybody out like any like bands, but there was just like stuff where I was like, I think I'm supposed to like this, but I was just like, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't feel the groove. I don't feel. It seems like they're taking themselves really seriously.
I felt that way about like, and I don't mind saying this, like Mahavishnu, like orchestra stuff. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like that. And honestly, even I like Weather Report a lot, but even some Weather Report, I'm just like, you know what I mean? Or
Yeah,
Solomon Syndicate for that matter. Like,
Yeah,
it's kind of the
I've
same.
come to appreciate that stuff more. And believe it or not, though, Return to Forever was actually my favorite of that era
Yeah.
of really early fusion.
Yeah, I
Mahavishnu,
get that.
it was too shreddy for me, but there are tracks, and I especially found this out recently, like their more ballady stuff or like pocket stuff is so good. But the sort of
Totally.
crazy,
Yeah.
the crazy shred stuff, I still am just like, I can't
Yeah.
give it,
Yeah,
like,
same.
I just can't do it.
Yeah, I remember there was a band that we're in. I think we've talked about this before. There was a band that we were in back in Knoxville called Bear Fight. And the whole idea
love that band
for that
name.
band was to
It's a
play.
perfect band name.
Yeah.
The whole idea for that band was to play really fast, really loud, and play really hard music.
Sure.
And so we played some music for a while, and then we decided to cover Romantic Warrior record. And
Front to back? Like
Yeah,
the whole
front to
thing?
back, the whole deal.
Holy
And
shit.
we played one show of it.
played one show. Plans to do another, but
we
did
had
not.
plans to do another.
Oh my
but
God.
But-
it was a lot of work.
All this being said, the point I'm
cool.
trying to get to is we wanted to do, or I had the idea of doing Birds of Fire, front to back. But then as I started listening to it and like diving into it more, it just didn't have the same thing that hit me that
Yeah,
Romantic
the
Warrior
Romantic
did.
Warrior.
I
Yeah.
completely
You know?
agree. And I look, I'm not like listening to Romantic Warrior every day and
Right.
stuff like that, but I still remember like hearing it. And weirdly enough, like I never was a big fan of Al Di Meola's electric playing. Like I've always loved his acoustic. Like he did this record. It was basically like the is it Friday night or Saturday night in San Francisco? It's Friday night in San Francisco, right?
Oh,
I think there's both now because they did 2 nights, so now it confuses me.
didn't know that.
Whatever. That record is just like Shredville. It doesn't really do anything for me. But they did this record in the 90s called The Guitar Trio.
Okay, I don't know
That is just Paco de Lucia, John McLaughlin, and Al Di Meola. That is legitimately one of my favorite acoustic records of all time. Every time I play it for people, they're like, those are the same guys who were just like shredding on that other record where it was just like any sort of just like normal melody was like not considered.
It's like non-existent.
I
feel that way. I feel that way about bass albums. Like, there's like two types of bass albums. There's like one where it's just music written by bass players, and then there's another one where it's just written music that only a bass player plays.
Sure.
And it's like those are the albums that I can't stand.
Like that Nathan East one. I really like the Nathan East one.
Yeah,
because that one was totally just.
Yeah, but the show
Music
of
for
hands,
music's
the
sake.
show of hands record, the Victor Wooten record, show of hands, is where he plays like Cherokee, and then he plays like some like he plays like a bunch of stuff that's like just bass. There's like that's where classical thump is on, and like where it's just him going.
What is the record that he did Overjoyed on? Is that the record? The Stevie Wonder tune Overjoyed?
Yeah, I don't know if it's that one or if it's one of his other ones.
Because I was never a big bass record fan, but somebody did give me that record in like 8th grade, and particularly, it's probably because I'm obsessed with Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
I really liked. It's weird because like I've never really listened to Bela Fleck and the Flecktones.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really been like up on Victor's playing. Not as a knock, but there are moments where I hear stuff. I'm like, this is so musical and so good.
Well, that's the thing. That's a bummer. I met this dude who's been with Federa, the company that makes the bass that Victor plays with. He's been with that company for a really long time. We were talking about Victor specifically, and I was like, it almost sucks that he developed that whole way of playing. Because there are albums where he takes regular solos and he just plays bass. And he is so good.
Yeah.
And nobody will ever know that side of him. Like, there's an album where him and his family, who are all players, they play with this except for the drummer's name is JD Blair. They play.
Dude, he was in
Oh,
Shania's
that's right.
band. Yeah,
That's
it was.
right. We talked about
JD
him
is
before.
the best,
Right.
and his pocket is
Incredible.
essentially unrivaled.
And so all they do on this album is play like Sly and the Family Stone, like that kind of stuff, and just
Crushing,
listening to
right?
Victor play that stuff, you're just like, oh my god, he's insanely good.
Yeah.
It's a bummer.
There's a lot of, and you can probably tell, there's a lot of like gospel chops drummers I feel the same way about, where I'm like, they're doing all this wanking, and then I hear them be forced to play just a pocket groove for a little bit, and I'm like,
oh my God.
it's so good. Why don't you play
do
like
that all the time.
Do that all the
Yeah.
time. That other stuff sucks.
Yeah.
Do that. Like
Right.
that is so. I love. Like there's so many drummers where and I don't want to say any names here, but there are gospel chops guys where I hear them play a groove and I'm just like floored.
This is awesome.
And I wish that it, clearly like people have their own thing and like
Well, and like
it's-
genre expectations. I think
Sure,
I think people
yeah.
crap on that style. People crap on the drummers too much, but what a lot of people don't get is the genre demands that constantly. So it's like 30% the genre's fault, and then I think the other.
I just hate all of
70%.
that. Like
Yeah, which I get. Which
I
totally
like
understand.
players that are like the song is the most important thing.
Yeah, which I
and,
totally
and there's
understand.
clearly like ways to play virtuosically. Is that a word?
Virtuosically.
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Within that context.
Yeah, virtuosically within a singer, within the context of a singer.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you hear like James Taylor's band, and it's like
Sure.
you
Yeah,
hear
his
Landau and
live
Jimmy
band
Johnson
is-
and Gadd and
Right.
Goldings,
Yeah.
and you're just like, oh, all of these guys are playing the coolest shit,
Yeah.
and yet it never gets in the way of the song, and it's
Yeah.
hard because like a lot of the like gospel chopsy guys are capable of doing it, and they just don't. I think that's the bummer for me. Is it's like it's all there. You're just doing all this stuff that. I mean, I'm also being totally judgmental, and it is subjective, but I do think
I
it
get it.
sucks. When I was in, Alabama and Tennessee as like a 17-year-old, because I graduated high school early and went out there, I really was like, whoa, there's a church on every street corner. I just never experienced that before. It's just not the case
Yeah.
in Southern California at all. So it was. This is a roundabout way of being like, you guys probably are more familiar with players involved in that, because you probably
Oh,
had a lot of
sure.
friends that played.
Yeah.
Probably had a really regular church gig that was like probably a big chunk of their monthly income.
Oh yeah.
That was most of the musicians in town.
Yeah.
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 so
If you
probably have-
lived off of music, you played at a church.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys probably have more of a view of like how they view songs versus
Yeah,
I don't
people
really
from other
know
genres.
enough about it.
Yeah, the weird thing is like, and I this is like an honest statement is like, singers will ask drummers to do that much all the time, like in that church, which is insane to think about.
Why?
Yeah, well, it's just like what they. It's kind of like you know how when you listen to like especially in jazz, like jazz piano players who will play like the chords, the melody, the bass line,
Yeah.
the entire song, and I think that's obnoxious, but it's almost like the same thing. It's like drummers are expected to like set up everything and play a ton of extra melody hits that singers are doing, and do fills when the singer's doing runs. It's like this really bizarre expectation.
Barf.
Yeah, it's
barf.
But the crazy thing is, it's like the genre. It's not even like drummers are like, I just want to flex, man. It's really like most drummers
demands it.
Yeah, most drummers, they don't even think like that.
Yeah.
And when somebody says like, please play less, they're like, okay, it doesn't even matter to them.
Yeah, well, it's so weird because like I love like kind of traditional gospel music. I love it. Like I could listen to Mahalia Jackson and like Aubrey Gent. Do you guys know Aubrey Gent?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That is the shit.
Totally.
I love like all the traditional sort of gospel songs. I love it. And the way the drummers played on those recordings.
Awesome.
My first introduction to a lot of that stuff was actually through a John Scofield New Orleans record called Piety Street.
Oh, see, I don't know that album.
It's a great album. Like George Porter Jr. from the Meters is on bass. It's like really killing.
Weird.
Yeah, and they do New Orleans songs, but a lot of them are like total church songs.
Sure, yeah.
And
yeah.
I think I got that as I'd been playing guitar for like 3 or 4 years. It was sometime in high school, and that was the first time where I was like, oh, this is totally connected to all the blues stuff that I like.
Yeah.
Because I was, you listen to B.B. King and stuff, and there's tons of like gospel chord changes, not in every song, but
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is the same stuff.
Yeah, it's like from the same world.
Yeah, and I immediately fell in love with it. And then I found Aubrey Gent almost certainly through like a Derek Trucks interview in some guitar magazine.
Totally.
Because when you listen to Aubrey Gent, you're like, oh, wow, he was a massive influence on Derek Trucks. Huge influence.
Yeah. It's cool to me that musicians, and I first thought about this when I saw the Standing in the Shadows of Motown, that documentary, how that they made this comment in there that, when all that, like back a long time ago when racism was just awful, not like it is now, but it was cool then that musicians have consistently been very progressive and inclusive as far as like willing to check out somebody from a different world, willing to work with somebody and view somebody's art form as legitimate from a different world. I think that's very cool.
Totally.
And I think musicians have been that way for, a very long time.
I think it was one of the first places. I mean, I wasn't alive, so I'm absolutely not the best person to talk about this, but from at least reading and
you can speculate for sure.
That it seems like, because the music world has always been a very progressive place, that like that was some of the first areas where sort of the race barrier was like, because I notice that now, like, nobody gives a shit what your skin color is in the music world. Can you play? Are you a good hang? That's it.
Right.
Especially on like a musician to musician level.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, look, maybe there's some weird underbelly of players that I'm not aware of that are not like that, but every single person I know could give two shits about anything, like what city you're from, what race you are, what religion. Like, none of that matters. Like, can you play? Are you a good hang?
Yeah.
That's truly... That's it, as far as musicians are concerned.
And even in that realm, we've already established that musicians they're willing to take in some weirdos. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, which is very cool.
There's a lot of folks that are sort of like spectrum-y and have sort of quirks.
For sure.
And like, I'm so used to that now. It doesn't even it doesn't even register anymore, because there's so many people that are like hyper intelligent, strange folks.
Yeah.
And I love it. It just doesn't bother me at all. I always was just so bored with, before I was hanging out with only musicians when I was, living in San Diego. And I mean, there were good people I hung out with, but like, I felt like 90% of my interests were not overlapping with theirs at all.
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't have the sort of weirdo quirk factor of like hanging around musicians where you're like, man, this dude's so strange, but it doesn't bother me at all. Like, it's really not like they have this cool insight and are clearly really gifted. And yeah.
'Cause that's all that matters.
It really is. Like, this the only thing that matters to me.
Yeah.
Is are you good hang, and are you
really good?
Do you love music, and do you care about
absolutely.
about
the
music?
art form?
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, I think that's great. That should be like our banner.
I think that's great.
Yeah, I think that's great.
It comes across like the more you know type
Great.
rainbow.
Yeah, when I get better at video editing, I'll put that in.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's a promise to all you
That's a
Lark
promise.
heads out there.
And anybody
Remember, we have 10%.
yeah, of all rainbows. That's not true.
Really, of anybody listening to this, you own 10% of their bank account.
Right.
That's true.
I think
yeah.
that's
Totally.
a contract that you. It's binding. It's like the iTunes contract.
Yeah.
You know?
While we're at it, go ahead in the comments below, put your account and routing number
yeah,
to your
yeah.
bank.
Yeah. We're gonna need that 10% like.
It just makes it
ASAP.
easier for us, and we don't have to like chase you down. So.
Yeah. That's good. I was gonna
Maybe
Garrett, I-
social security number, list of fears. you know.
Probably
Definitely.
social security number.
daily
yeah.
schedule.
Daily schedule.
Yeah, mother's maiden name.
I Garrett, I was gonna ask you this earlier. What I was gonna ask you this when we were talking about Tony Williams. So I as a non-drummer, I definitely agree with like what Josh said about like my understanding of Tony Williams is that he's like a Hendrix, he's like a Jocko, he's like a one of those kind.
Yeah.
So as a drummer, like what is like a more kind of like what does that look like as a drummer? Do you know what I mean? Like you said,
What his impact was
yeah,
on.
like you said, like what
Oh,
he
being
because just because I like him, I want to know more about him. I want to know like what exactly did he bring. You know what I mean? Like I understand it. I can understand it kind of like cerebrally as
Yeah,
a musician,
right.
but like as from a drummer's perspective.
I know that tone was a huge thing with Tony. He had like the very dry cymbal. That was like a huge thing that was brought.
like
So-
nobody was doing that before.
Well, it's like I know like two people that do that. Like Jack D and Tony were like the ones that kind of like had that like super dry type of ride cymbal. And there's probably some other dudes doing it, but those are the ones that like really stuck out to me and that really,
Yeah. Is that so they can
and it's
do
like
more?
it's so much clean.
Or not?
And, like
You know what I
Tony.
mean?
Well, yeah, it's like Tony was like so clean and his chops were like just so tight and so clear. And
Yeah.
having a cymbal and equipment like that makes that just pop even more.
Gotcha. Like,
Makes it drive so much, pushes the band forward. There's like no wash that like,
gotcha.
which is funny because of that meme where they're talking about that wash, that nice Tony wash. You know what I'm talking
Tony
about?
Wash.
Yeah,
I love that.
What was that video? Was it Jazz Robots or something?
Yeah, I think so.
I love
yeah.
the internet.
That's great.
I know kind of an analog to that, like pre-Tony was the same idea of like having less decay.
Mm-hmm.
Like when originally like bebop came along, a lot of the jazz drummers were taking a tom and making it a kick because it was smaller and had a
Oh.
shorter decay, because all of a sudden
Interesting.
when they were having to play along with Bird,
Right.
the decay was too long to like be playing
Yeah.
kicks back to back
Right.
at
Can't be
such
as
a
notey.
fast
It would just sound like
speed.
Clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can't be like, duh. It's
Yeah.
got to be, duh, duh. It's
Right.
got to be that short decay. And it was
Right.
kind of the same thing of like, well, if you're going to play more, you can't have just this sort of like everything just like falling into each other. Like
Right.
it has to be more individualized between the kind of segments of the drums. I feel like it's probably the
Right.
same thing with the
Totally.
dry
It left so
cymbals.
much room for any other frequency, in that register to take over and fill
Yeah.
up that space, And also, it's just the biggest thing is that it was so clear and it just cut through everything, and you could just hear him so well.
So did Keith Carlock change a lot, or was he just like was Keith Carlock an innovator, or was he like a perfecter?
That was a big jump.
Sorry,
Yeah, you jumped
yeah, I'm
like
sorry. I was
50
thinking about,
years, dog.
Yeah, no, you're right. I'm sorry. My like line of thought was like
Not 50.
You know,
probably 40.
like people often mention Keith Carlock in that era, almost in the way that some people talk about Tony Williams. Like people.
Oh, that he's like that generation.
He's like the Michael Jordan of you know what I
yeah.
mean, of like that generation of drumming in a specific way. I don't literally mean because obviously it's like Vinny.
I
and
haven't
all those
heard
guys.
that one as much. I always hear Vinny.
Yeah.
I'd say I always like what you just described. I usually hear if you just take, not to knock Keith, he's amazing.
No,
but
I thought Keith Carlock came. He was like a generation after all those guys, though.
After Vinny, yeah, he was.
but
Yeah,
I don't think he was. I feel like everything. I mean, Keith has his own sound, but I feel like
Right.
Vinny kind of did all of the. I mean, he had his own. They're
Yeah.
obviously different guys, but Vinny.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know.
He
I could
kind of
be
like
way off
paved the
base.
way for
For like a
those
Keith.
the Krantz regime.
Of like kind of players that can play
Yeah.
like a session song player, but also have all this crazy ability to do. I
Yeah.
mean, you hear Vinny on like a Bublé record, and it swings
Yeah.
super
Oh,
hard,
yeah.
and then you hear him do some charisma show at the Baked Potato.
Right.
That's the right band, right?
I think so.
Yeah,
I
with
think.
the K.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And it's just like the most insane shit you've ever heard. And you're like, that's
Yeah.
the same guy?
I guess I put Keith Carlick in that realm because most people I've heard talk about him always say like he can do anything, like anything he wants to, he can do. He just has like the mind and the facility to do anything.
Uh-huh.
You know, so
Yeah.
but he's also a guy I don't know too much about. So that's why I was asking. Like, you know, I know he's obviously incredible, but like, is he a game changer or is he just like really good? You know what I mean? Like historically, I don't mean like obviously opinions aside, but like historically,
You're probably better equipped to.
Yeah, I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, I've checked out tons of Keith's playing, but I've never really taken the time to think. He is an innovator, but is he an innovator in that
Like a
way?
game
Yeah,
changer.
like a game
kind of
changer.
like
yeah,
a
it's-
next level.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like,
it's
like
different.
allowing people to do something else.
Yeah, like
I mean,
some-
I think
yeah.
one of the like his biggest like quirks or things that he does is he does use that like big open bass drum sound, which is like not
was he bringing that back though?
well.
You know what
that
I mean?
that wasn't really. I mean, it's just really boingy like type of. That's not really a good word. Just big open bass drum sound that wasn't. I'm trying to think about where you're thinking it could have been brought back from.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Because
The word open.
with that type of music that he's playing, this was my point.
Because
that-
Bonham had a big open
Right.
bass
Okay.
sound.
Yeah. But with the music that he's playing, it's like most of the stuff he's doing is like more funky, more like
Just
the
like
guitar.
straighter, yeah.
Yeah. So like usually you would think you'd have drier sounds and everything, but he had that like wide open sound. That was a big thing.
I would think from that era, somebody that I would consider a game changer doesn't mean they're better or my favorite, but I would
Right.
say Chris Dave because of all this, like no toms,
Sure.
all snares.
Yeah.
To me, that's like
Yeah.
whether or not you like his drumming. I mean, I do, but whether or not you like his drumming, that was a truly innovative. Where everyone's just like, "What do you mean you only use snares?"
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The
That
hell
was a
are-
huge.
The hell are you
that was a huge
talking
deal.
about?
Yeah.
What do you mean you use a symbol that looks like a tower?
Yeah,
You know what I'm talking
like
about?
yeah, I would
His,
think
like
that.
other second D'Angelo
Yeah.
tour or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that big tower.
I remember
So
remember
weird.
hearing something that he would call Sabian and be like, "I want all your symbols that you guys like." Like part of the reason, and I might be totally wrong on this, but like part of the reason why like cymbals are more expensive is one, they're hand hammered. A lot of them are hand hammered, and so they're each individually crafted.
Yeah, like unique.
Yeah, and then also like there's like breakage, you know. So like you have cymbals that break, so they gotta toss some of the material that they. So anyway, so he called and he said, "I want those cymbals that."
The broken
Oh,
ones.
Broken
I know
ones.
which one you're. Yeah.
That's cool.
And
Yeah.
so he started like mixing and matching these. And
Yeah, when did the stack start? Because that was like a cool thing.
Oh,
Like
I don't
when
know.
when I was in
Never thought about
college,
that.
that was like the first time I'd ever heard of it. But every drummer I knew was talking about it. Everybody's like, "Oh yeah, you gotta have a stack. You gotta have a stack. You put your stack over here and you crash on your stack.
Yeah.
You know, like whatever." But I
Dude,
was like, and I was just like,
you
okay,
gotta have a stack.
God. But I mean, if you think about it, even Boba Jam, the majority of the drummers I've seen at Boba Jam, most of those drummers play with a stack, at least one.
Yeah, probably.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I haven't been paying attention.
I have. No.
Because you
but-
gotta have it.
You
stacked.
gotta have
There's
a
one thing
stack,
I've learned in LA.
dude.
You gotta have.
I'm gonna
a
tell
stack.
every drummer that plays Boba Jam from now on, like, you gotta have a stack,
Honestly,
dude.
they'll probably reply in like a very like zealous way and be like, "Oh, trust me."
Dude, you haven't seen my stack yet.
And they're all
Bro, listen.
They're all
They're
from
all like
Philly
have
and
like a
Brooklyn
terrible
and-
like
yeah.
fake Eastern like East like I just am doing like general East Coast accent. Hey, dude, you gotta have a
Hey, you
stack.
Gotta
dude.
have a stack. Anyway,
I think if I can offer my opinion on as a non-drummer,
Sure.
Yeah.
I've always thought of Keith as just a really great drummer that had little things that he did that differentiated him and he has his sound.
Yeah, yeah.
But I wouldn't put him on the like game changer
Sure.
thing where you're just like.
What
And
he
it
did was
doesn't even
never
mean
been
you
done
need to
before.
be a game changer to be
No,
like
no,
one
yeah.
of the best players.
No.
But like I would think of Chris Dave once again as like a game changer where it's like that. I mean, you could even say that like Travis Barker was a game changer as far as like the way that people
that
set
world.
their snare drum.
Sure.
like that low tilted back. It doesn't mean that he's on the same vein as like a Chris Dave, but I mean like as far as like culturally, it had a big effect
Totally.
on.
Well, and
on
also
people.
like being a game changer isn't necessarily about how good you are as much as like how good you are in a specific time and place, right?
Yeah, and your
'Cause it's
sort of
about- 'cause it's
cultural
about
effect.
influence.
Right.
Yeah, like Hendrix is. I always like he's like the example of like Hendrix changed everything for guitar.
Mm-hmm.
He just did, and like he's always the example I go back to of like what is a game changer.
Yeah.
Him,
Right.
you know.
But you gotta think like if he was doing those same things in jazz instead of like rock popular music at that time, would he have been as much of a game changer? It's like hard
I think
to say,
his
right?
I think
Yeah.
his mind was so because you know you always hear about the things he was gonna do with Miles or all the sort of like
right,
like before he passed. I think he would have. I think he was a truly special. But then once again, like there's guys like Clapton that I wouldn't say are as much of a game changer as Hendrix was as far as just like changing the game. But Clapton is one of the most iconic ever. Probably had the most. I think his career is the pinnacle of careers. The guy has been around since the early 60s. He's been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in how many different bands? The Yardbirds, Cream, his solo band. Did Blind Faith get inducted in? I think
Sure.
I'm not
I
sure.
think Blind Faith with Ginger Baker and Steve Winwood
Yeah.
were also in there, and I might even be missing like. And then played with Delaney and Bonnie, and like just has had this unbelievable career that spanned all these different eras. Like I think that is very special. Whereas Hendrix was like he was around for a very short time, made a big difference, and then was gone.
Yeah.
But Clapton's career, in my opinion, I'm like that's the career that everybody should be looking at.
That's interesting. I've always thought the idea of like a successful career is so personal. You know what I mean? Although I agree with you.
Yeah, yeah.
To any measurement of success, Clapton has probably reached a height.
Songwriting,
Yeah.
he's an iconic guitar player. He's an
the amount of
iconic
money he's
sideman.
made.
The
Right,
amount of like
yeah.
Grammys. Not that anybody cares about that, but
measuring, we're talking about measurements. So but yeah, I had never thought of him about having like the pinnacle of a music career. But yeah, I think he's certainly like a viable option. You
yeah,
know
I
what
mean, even a lot of the other like really successful '60s artists didn't have. I mean, who had a record like Unplugged 40 years into their career that won like 9 Grammys and was the biggest record of the year, in whatever early '90s, whenever that came out. Like literally over 40 years into their career, put out one of his most iconic records. Just other
that's
than
crazy.
like maybe Tom Petty putting out like Wildflowers way into his career, that was like a really iconic record. But even that wasn't 40 odd years. That was maybe like 25 years into their career.
and even Tom Petty didn't have probably like the accolades, right? Like,
Or the radio success of like
Yeah.
Tears in Heaven.
Right.
Dude.
and then you look at on the other side of things, you look at a guy like Vinny who made a ton of money, played like is like the consummate sideman in some ways, the pinnacle of his instrument, arguably. You know what I mean? Certainly like top 5, by a lot of people's standards. But even then, more people know about Clapton. You know what I mean? Probably because of songwriting and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
The
he-
fact that he was a front man and
Sure,
there's a lot of
yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
And
He's more
I mean,
visible.
to be honest, Cream was a groundbreaking band because that was the first time that real jazz influence was brought into this like new world of Marshall Stack on 10
Oh, I see.
world. Like nobody had done that. I mean, there was obviously aspects of that in Hendrix band, in the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Band of Gypsies is more like funk, and that was later. But like as far as Cream, like in '67, they were doing shit
Yeah.
that was
I was trying to remember what year that
extremely
was.
experimental. Like you listen to like the live Cream stuff from that era, it's super avant-garde for that
Yeah.
era. Like nobody was doing what they were doing, and it doesn't mean you have to like it, but it was like
But it was happening.
it was really groundbreaking. Like that was probably, as far as Clapton being a part of a groundbreaking thing, that was probably his most groundbreaking project. Once again, it doesn't have to be your favorite, but as far as like nobody had ever done this before,
Yeah.
I think Cream is kind of like the pinnacle of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about, like, to think about like artists and players who like had a bang, as opposed to artists and players who just had like this extremely consistent kind of like trajectory in their career, and I would imagine to have that it would take some sort of like kind of like always growing or always being able to deliver in like a next level kind of fashion. Whether that's like hearkening back to what you used to do or like doing the next thing that's cool is, that's like time and a place. But yeah, that's
I mean, Bob Dylan's probably a good example of somebody that like reinvented himself several times, kind of like Miles.
Yeah.
Where like every 3 or 4 years, like he just reinvented his entire thing.
Right.
I mean, he always sounds like Bob Dylan, clearly.
Sure.
But I mean, realistically, it's like who else was constantly reinventing themselves in that way? I'd say Clapton in a different way was doing that, more out of like getting interested in different genres, whereas Bob Dylan was kind of like mentally in a different place that was leading him to all this sort of different styles of writing.
He was just like constantly innovating.
Yeah, whereas Clapton was like, he had his like period where he got obsessed with the Tulsa J.J. Cale sound, and like, I posted because this podcast is really about our Instagrams, on my story, which I expect everyone to watch.
Which, if they want to follow you,
great stuff. Oh, at Joshua Ray Gooch,
Good.
JOSHUARAYGOOCH. I posted something from some like 70s Clapton record and just was commenting on the drum groove, and so many drummers were like, yes, because it's like a very specific thing, and Clapton was really good at sort of being like, well, what's the sound of this Tulsa? Like, what makes the sound this? And he's just really good at like when he puts together a group of like, hey, we're going to do this Robert Johnson record. Like he found guys that like really understand. Like he just seems to have this really inherent understanding of like stylistic differences. And you can hear it in his blues playing where you're like, oh, this guy doesn't just know like B.B. King. He knows B.B. King, Freddie King, Albert King, but also knows like Son House and Robert Johnson and Blind Lemon Jefferson and like the Buka White, like the Delta guys. But then he knows like the jump blues guys, like, T-Bone Walker, and like he knows all the sounds. He knows the difference between Chicago and Delta and Texas blues and
he didn't just take, which is like what a lot of musicians are guilty of, which is totally fine. But he didn't just like take from those sounds and like he didn't just like cherry pick. You know what I mean? He like has an understanding of the sound. He didn't just be like, oh, these are 3 of my favorite licks.
He knows the whole thing.
It's very cool.
It's an encompassing thing. I think that he's a really good example of somebody that it wasn't innovation as much. It was just like extremely intelligent weaving through a career. Mm-hmm. Whereas somebody like Miles or Bob Dylan, you're like, okay, this is like a new guy every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
That almost nobody does that. Oh, I forgot. Derek and the Dominoes are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame also.
Oh,
Another band that he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for.
Oh, wow. Jeez.
I don't think anybody has that many. And
I'm sure.
if Blind Faith is not inducted yet, they should be. I don't know if you know that record, but that record straight up bangs.
I know of it, but I don't.
It's so good, dude.
I don't like know
Some of my favorite Ginger Baker drumming is on that record.
That's
it's
cool.
Really killing. It's Clapton, I think, on a telly. Could be wrong. I think he's on a telly though.
Speaking of, have you seen that documentary, Beware of Mr. Baker?
No. God, like, I need to get on it. Even in the last 2 weeks, it's come up like 4 times. Because I just did a gig 2 days ago with Blair Cinta and Brian Green, 2 of my favorite musicians. We did this Fela Kuti song called Let's Start. Mm-hmm. I think it's from 1971, and it's a live record with Ginger Baker on drums.
Oh,
and it's super killing. And we talked about that movie. I hadn't seen it.
Have you seen it?
No.
Cool. Moving on.
but
wait, why should we see it? I can guess, but like,
well,
he's
that's
like
the
a
answer.
straight up. He's a straight up lunatic, right?
Yeah.
Like he's like not allowed in like several of Europe's countries.
Yeah.
But I've heard it's really good and really well made, and
Yeah.
he's living in Africa now, right?
I think so. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's right.
But I think he always
is that
was
a
interested in
necessity,
it.
or is that a
I think he was
I
always
think that's the
interested
only
because
country he's allowed.
That's
in.
what
Yeah.
I mean. That's what I mean.
Continent. Let's be clear. We know.
Oh, what did?
Africa
excuse me.
We are aware of this.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah, in podcasts, stuff just rolls.
Yeah, you just have.
But,
Yeah.
But I mean, he was 1971 as a rock guy or rock jazz European guy already playing with Fela. I I feel like a lot of cats either didn't know who he was, knew who he was, but didn't know much about him. He was playing with him.
Yeah.
Like, he clearly had an interest in, like,
pretty
African
cool.
drumming
Yeah.
from early on.
That's
Yeah.
very cool.
You know, because I'm pretty sure there were multiple percussionists in this recording, plus Ginger, plus a horn section. Like, it was a dense band, and we did the song as a trio, 2 guitars and drums.
Nice.
So we really had to be on our
Nice.
toes to
Yeah.
like try to recreate a
That's
full
awesome.
sound.
Yeah,
That's
that's
awesome.
cool.
Another guy I always kind of put in the like realm of guys who have reinvented themselves like a billion times, and I didn't know this for a long time, is Jeff Beck.
Oh,
Like-
hell yeah.
Like I knew what I understood of Jeff Beck's sound, which is like just
Which
the
was
past,
what?
like,
Like, what did you know?
just like the
blow-
past like 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So,
like live at Ronnie Scott's and the Crossroads stuff.
yes. And then I heard some record I don't even know, and I was like, who's this playing guitar? And somebody was like, that's Jeff Beck. I was like,
Maybe a
nah.
Stevie Wonder record?
I was like, I'm not sure,
Or
but I was
Roger
like,
Waters?
that's not Jeff Beck. And they were like, no, it's Jeff Beck, I swear. And then I was like, really? And then I checked him out like in 3 to 5 year increments, and I mean, just
unbelievable.
it's crazy.
Jeff
Like,
Beck is.
I had no idea.
It's
That's
insane.
crazy.
If you go
He's
back
the
and listen
best.
to like a time period of Jeff Beck that you hadn't been listening to, completely different player. Like in like an astonishing way.
Yeah, once
Yeah.
again,
So
was in
weird.
the Yardbirds
Right.
and was starting to get his sound. And then he had the, Jeff Beck group era with like Rod Stewart, which is predates Led Zeppelin. People don't realize like Truth came
guess
out
it
before
does,
Zeppelin
yeah.
1. And it was heavy as shit.
I did not even put that together, but you're totally right.
It's like, once again, like Cream, I think Cream and
wow.
Jeff Beck group came out.
How old is he?
Jeff's in his 70s. Like,
Okay,
he's
that makes sense.
yeah,
That's kind of
almost.
what
I think
thought.
he's
Yeah,
the
okay.
same, roughly the same age as Jimmy Page and
Yeah. Okay.
and Clapton and those cats. But yeah, I mean, I still think that as far as instrumental guitar records, Blow by Blow, if not the best, is in the top 3 of all time. Produced by George Martin. People don't realize
I
that.
didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, like Blow by Blow, I think is,
Wow.
and it's also the insane thing is like Jeff does not have a history of like music theory and like is not like the most music theory guy.
Right.
And then you hear him play on Blow by Blow with like straight up fusion cats.
That just means it was in here, which is
Dude.
very cool.
It
Yeah.
doesn't even make sense. You're just like, how did, like, there's all these crazy time signatures and chord progressions,
Yeah.
and yet he completely sounds at home over it, and you're just like, I don't understand how he did that.
I can say this as a person who, for a very large portion of my like young music career, very interested in theory. Wanted to know all like the really lame scales. Like I wanted to know all that
Nerd.
stuff. Yeah, I was like definitely like a
Like
theory nerd.
Mongolian beef scale and
yeah.
like
yeah, like the Polynesian sauce scale.
yeah,
and
yeah,
things
yeah. I
like that.
love that.
Szechuan scale.
Yeah, right. But it's funny the more and more I learn about like these famous dudes who like theory people and like academic people have famously latched onto. The more and more you learn about those people, not a lot of those guys were not like that. Like Pat
No.
Metheny. A lot of people think like he understood the theory like 10 billion years into the future and all this stuff. No, the stories that I've heard about
Yeah,
like
what's that one story that?
yeah,
Yeah.
I heard this one of the guy people call them like the ABCs of jazz, and all that means is like they were the people who, it's
For jazz education.
yeah, it's like jazz educators. They were the first people to like put it down in books, and
Yeah.
those books were the things that people learn from, which is amazing and great.
Which was Abersold,
Jerry
David
Coker
Baker,
and Jerry Coker.
Jerry Coker.
Yeah, story goes that Pat Metheny was doing a very young Pat Metheny was doing a clinic in Miami, and he's up there and he's playing this tune, like whatever. And then at the end, he was like, does anybody have any questions? And somebody raised hands and they go, what were you doing over this one thing, right? Like, what were you doing over this chord or something like that? And he goes like, and then from the back behind the curtain, Jerry Coker goes, it was Lydian augmented scale. And Pat Metheny goes, Lydian augmented scale. So the reason, and everybody's like, yay, Lydian aug. So the reason I like that story is like, even to dudes like Metheny who, like, theory people have like always like latch on
Yeah.
to. It's always like Metheny, like Bill Evans.
But he
and, like,
probably eventually
Coltrane.
learned a lot more of it.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying it like started here. It didn't.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You know
he
what I'm
didn't
saying?
start in the academic.
Right, which I think is very
I
cool.
think it's super important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's the same with Jeff Beck, right? Like
Total.
Like-
The thing with him though is I don't think he ever learned it.
which is fine. Which is not the point. you
Which
know
is
what I mean?
not. But yeah, like he
Very cool.
he almost makes less sense because at least with like Pat, you're like, well, he was clearly transcribing a lot of music that was very harmonically
Yeah, he wasn't
dense.
like playing out. You know what I mean? He was
Yeah.
just like playing the chords, and he happened to hear the chords.
But
you know?
with
Right.
Jeff Beck, it's like some alien shit where you're
Totally.
like, I just don't even. It doesn't make sense that you're playing in 9
Or
with
like-
like Jan Hammer and all these cats that are
Right.
burning, and he like never took lessons and like didn't really know that much theory at all.
Yeah.
And he just like he just hears it. It's
But
really
you know
crazy.
he did the work though. I mean, you would have to play like that.
Oh,
you know what
yeah.
I'm saying? Like it doesn't mean he didn't put time in.
Right.
You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
for sure.
I feel like
yeah.
that's something a lot of people commonly think is like people who are like savants. They somehow have the advantage of they don't have to put as much time in. It's like no, not really. Like they
Yeah, they might have a natural sort of.
yeah, but they're not literally putting in like 5,000 less hours than somebody else. Like that doesn't happen.
Right.
And another interesting side of this sort of like harmonic and theory discussion is there's this this is how nerdy I get. There is an
Let's
audio
go.
file online of an old Schofield clinic. There's no video for it. It's just like somebody in the audience was like
Nice.
recording it from the back of the room.
Yeah.
And I somehow found it. It's not on like YouTube. It's on like some friggin' nerd site.
Yeah.
And I went on and found it. And Schofield tells this story about Miles. Somebody asked about Miles. He's talking about theory, and he talks about Miles where he's like, he was with Miles, and Miles was like, man, play that diminished chord or something like that. And he was like, what? And he's like, play that diminished chord. And he goes over the piano and plays the chord. And Schofield's like, play it again? He goes, Miles, that's an augmented chord. That's not a diminished chord. And he goes, I don't give a shit. Just play it.
Nice.
Or some story like
Yeah,
that where
yeah,
he's like,
yeah.
he knew the sound.
Yeah.
He just doesn't.
Just
like,
because it doesn't have the label.
it had
Right.
probably been.
matter.
The label's
40
put on after the sound.
Yes.
The
Yes.
sound is what's most
And
important.
he probably knew the sound back in the 50s or 40s, but he probably hadn't used it as a verbal description
Yeah.
in a decade or two, I'm
Yeah.
assuming. And just like, but he obviously knew like he knows the sound and where it happens in sort of, you know, where to place it
where
within.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was like, it's like he didn't know the difference between diminished and augmented. It was just like, Sco was like, oh, wow, man, he really has not thought, like, he can play it, obviously, but he has not thought about the sounds of
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Right.
Or this, you know, attaching a term
yeah.
to that
Yeah.
in a long time.
Yeah.
Which is, were you about to say something?
Nope.
Which is cool. This is what I was talking about the other day when we were in this text thread just talking about something, and I
Is it
made
about crowds?
no, it wasn't that. No,
told
explain the joke.
No, I told him.
Oh, you did. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I heard it before.
Oh, nice. Yeah, Garrett doesn't like him.
Yeah, do I.
But this guy made a comment, and he was like, "You can't let the information dictate the song. You can't let the theory dictate what happens next in the music."
Totally.
Right.
And that it's like the same thing. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, you can have like an on paper understanding of music, but it doesn't really. That's fine. But if you don't have if you have the the real world
Yeah.
understanding of music, like everything makes more sense.
That's why so much, like, fusion and jazz sucks ass.
Totally.
And why, like, somebody, like a band like Soundgarden, you're like, this is the coolest shit ever because they're not. Now, look, I wouldn't want to hear them do, like, an improv set. It would
Sure.
probably be terrible.
Yeah.
But listening to them write, they're clearly not being boxed in by theory or even 4/4 time signatures. It's just
Sure.
like
Right.
you write and you hear it as you go. And I think that,
Yep.
like, you know, the bass playing, for instance, on Soundgarden is so much cooler than so many people that can, like,
Just
play a million more things and know all the theory in the world. Just because
Right.
it's like there's nothing inhibiting him from being like, yeah, I'm going to play power chords and bend them.
Yeah.
Like, you know, some really schooled guy is probably not going to do that.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something really special about that. So, like, Jeff Beck is once again going back to him, I think is a good example of a guy that can play with the heavy cats, but brings this sort of creativity of a guy that doesn't have any idea about any music theory at all.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of like this off the cuff, like, here we go. And, like, most cats are not. They don't do that.
Yeah, and that's not to say, like, you know, I am super guilty of, like, constantly crapping on, like, academic music stuff. Even though, like, I went through college and I have a degree. But, you know, that's part of the reason I feel that way. that's not to say that like that stuff is inherently bad. It's
No, not at all.
But there are a lot of people, like, let's all be real, there are a lot of people that use it as like a box. They don't use it as like a tool to like augment your abilities and options. They just use it as
diminish
like
your ability and options.
There you go.
Sorry,
Nice.
I'm an asshole.
Sorry.
All right, podcast.
I'm the drummer here, so I have to.
Podcast over.
I just forget my job.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's the bad thing, is that when people they get more information and then immediately like it builds this weird house that you know that all music has to live in, which is
and also, to be a little more even potentially harsh, I think a lot of the people that end up there never had a chance otherwise, because that's not how their brain works.
That's probably true.
They didn't.
Yeah.
They don't have that sort of like ability to disassociate from the academia and just write music like Jeff Beck does. I think it's more like the type of people who get interested in really nerdy fusion music, which, once again, I love Aquarium Rescue Unit, and like I love a lot of super out there music.
Yeah.
But I think that a lot of the people that veer in that direction are people that academia came before creativity in their life, and that's why they're almost screwed from the get-go.
Yeah.
You know what I
I don't
mean?
think they have to end up like that.
No,
but
no.
I agree with you though.
But I think there's at least there's just personality types.
Yeah.
And that obviously it's like I think it's the same idea with a lot of like with anything that you get genetically, whether it's sports or intelligence or something, like you are dealt a hand and then you have a certain spectrum to function within. Mm-hmm. So like if you want to be an athlete, like you have a certain ability that you can function within to like become a better athlete or to never work on it and never gain.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you can legitimately say like, oh, well, if I practice basketball as much as Michael Jordan, I could have been like Michael Jordan. I think there's certain sort of limitations to physical ability and mental ability that everybody has genetically. And I think music is somewhere in that spectrum because it falls somewhere within the creativity / IQ spectrum of like, there's a certain space to function within, and if you develop your craft to the highest extent, you can get to the top of your personal ability.
Yeah.
But I think to believe that everybody has the ability to get to a John Coltrane level, I think that's just a way of lying to you. People lie to themselves.
And I think that I agree with you.
And I'm not saying you were saying that. That was just
no. I got you.
That's a thing that I hear, and I'm
saying
like,
I agree with you. But I agree with what you're saying, and I also think though that most people, their musical abilities are like people, especially people who are like. They always say like, oh, I always wanted to play music, you know.
Is that Bob Dylan?
I always wanted to play music. No, but I think most people who are in that world, like their musical abilities are actually probably a little higher than they would guess. They just haven't taken the time, right? But I agree with you. Like I knew a guy in college. I mean, I practiced a lot in college, and he practiced like more than I did consistently, and he always had a hard time. He just always did.
Some people do not have the musical ability, and they can practice a lot. And if they enjoy it, well, who gives a shit if they're really good?
Yeah. This is all about taste.
But there's also that thing of like, nobody wants to admit it because everybody's freaking soft. Yeah. But there is just the fact that like some people, no matter how much they practice will never be exceptional musicians.
Yeah.
Just as in any, it's not specific about music.
No, it's
everything.
It's
some people have, I'm trying to, there's just physical limitations that, that can keep you away from like, there are certain people with really big hands that can get certain chords on piano that if you have smaller hands, like you can learn to play without doing that, but like that is a physical limitation, and just as there are sort of like mental inhibitors as well that can keep you away from grasping really. Certain people just have a hard time with music theory, and certain people that are really grasp music theory are really high in creativity.
Yeah.
There's just,
Right.
It's what's interesting though is that within your limitations, there's always room for innovation.
Yeah, totally.
You know what I mean? It's like it would be weird to say like a person with only this amount of ability can't be as successful as somebody with this amount of ability. that's not really what that means. You know what I mean? It's not like
Sure,
it's not a direct one-to-one. Just because you can consistently innovate in a space constantly.
Well, I think your
That doesn't ever
limitations
have to
often
stop.
lead to innovations.
Absolutely, yeah.
But then there's the other side of like you can hear somebody play and be like, once again, people want to say this, but you can think there's no way, no matter how much this person does, they'll be a professional musician.
Sure.
And most people don't want to say that, but I will put every bit of money in my bank account that that's true. Mm-hmm. It's just like we've all seen it. We've been around people that have tried to learn and they put in the time and they just suck. And there's stuff in our lives that I'm sure that we've put a bunch of time into and been like, I just am not that good at this thing.
Bad at this.
And like, I felt like math was like that for me. Like even if I put in time, I was just like, this just doesn't work well with me.
Yeah.
Which I know is typically not a musician thing. Musicians are typically good at math. But I was terrible at it. And like, look, maybe if I did it now and if I really put in the time, maybe I'm giving myself too much credit on how much time I put in. But I just am like, I suck at this. And there are people that have a natural ability that within 6 months could supersede my sort of ability and knowledge almost immediately. And that's something you just have to live with and learn. Like, oh, that's not one of my strong suits. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's just like, no,
yeah. Thank
that's
God
not
in
my
music,
thing.
most of the time it's a team sport, right? Like
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, it doesn't. If you're really bad at something, you can find the right teammate. You know what I mean? To like help you out, which is great.
Well, I mean, how many people look at a situation like Elton John and Bernie Taupin, where it's like, I'm not saying that Elton John can't write lyrics, but clearly he was like, this guy writes better lyrics than me.
Sure, yeah, they were working together for a reason, right?
Yeah, and like that's like a perfect relationship where it's symbiotic. One guy does this, one guy does this. They realize what their strong suit is. Mm-hmm. I think in life, one of the most important things you can do is acknowledge, like from a real, like objective perspective, like, am I good at this thing?
Yeah, you got to know what your weaknesses are.
It's really and what you're good at too. Mm-hmm. Like it's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, I've always been like really trying to get a good grasp on what am I good at, what am I bad at.
Yeah, I was watching an O'Teal Burbridge interview, and he was talking about, dude, you just got to always play to your strengths. Like if you're good at this one thing, just figure out how to do it in every situation.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I mean? Which is, it's like a funny blanket statement, and I don't think that's good information for every like level of, musician to hear. But I think especially for like higher mid to upper echelon musicians, that's incredible.
Yes,
like knowledge.
But lower to mid level, it's probably terrible advice because then people are going to be like, "Well, I'm good at shredding, so I'm not going to practice rhythm guitar."
Yeah. Well, the truth is, when you're lower, you're like mid to low level, you're not good at anything. You know what I mean? You're not like good in the grand scheme. You're just not good at anything.
Yeah, but I mean, I realized like my time was not good, and I don't think anybody else would have maybe noticed it earlier on. Maybe they did and did tell me. I don't know. But I really realized, like...
Wow, what a friend.
I was just like, I need to work, like, guitar players especially really avoid rhythm and time. It's just, like, not on the radar of what people focus on. And I was never in the world of academia. Like, I'm self-taught entirely.
Nice.
Like, I took a couple lessons after I was already relatively advanced and was like, I hate this, I want to do it on my own.
Yeah.
Once again, it's kind of that like punk rock mentality, which it at times can hurt you, but I think overall this was a good thing. But oh my god, what was I talking about? I just completely blanked on
guitar players, rhythm, and time.
Oh yes. So I did not focus on it nearly enough, and I'm sure I had like functional rhythm and functional time, but as far as like once I started hanging out with like really killing musicians, I realized how much they talked about that and would read more interviews and was like, man, like, I really realized, like, oh, all this other stuff is irrelevant if your time sucks.
Yeah.
And, like, it took me, like, objectively listening back to myself and being like, I need to work on this. And then I spent literally years just, like, only focusing on that, and everything else was irrelevant for a while. But I needed that sort of, like, that objective, like, is this good? I know internally it's not. Even though I'm fooling a lot of people, I know it's not as good as it needs to be. And I think if I didn't have that realization, I would not be the player that I am or have any of the work that I have now, because I realize, like, how often am I playing rhythm guitar?
Yeah.
And even when you're soloing, there's rhythm involved. So, like, it's so much more important than anything else.
Music is arguably more rhythm than it is anything else.
Totally.
You know?
But look, and guitar can be a very percussive instrument. I mean, you listen to like reggae and you're like, oh, all of it is percussion.
Yeah, sure.
Like guitar in reggae is a percussion instrument. It's like you listen to Bob Marley play rhythm guitar and you're like, I barely can hear the chord quality because it's so staccato and just he chokes it so much. Like you listen like to anybody listening, listen to the intro to Stir It Up, and you'll be like, you can barely tell what the chords are until the band comes in.
Yeah, yeah.
It just sounds like a chop.
Yeah.
And you realize like, oh, like that's all rhythm. The harmony's almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know.
It's red.
That's very cool. Okay, we got to wrap it up because the red and the...
We're gonna
yeah, I don't want to, like, lose it. So, LARKAST, bringing you the hard-hitting stuff.
Yeah.
Not everybody can meet their dreams. Just kidding.
Everyone's soft.
Yeah.
We own 10% of you. Goodbye.
Yeah, that's it.